Hi, I am Madhumita. Today we would discuss on surrogacy. Firstly, we would try to understand the concept of surrogacy. Then we would move on to discuss on the role of Indian state in promoting surrogacy industry. Thirdly, we would try to understand different ethical issues involved with the concept of surrogacy.
In AIDS, the enemy is not a transformed cell, but the HIV virus penetrating the helper T cells of the immune system. It is this invisibility of the virus acquired enemy-like metaphor. Therefore, it is justified that this virus has to be attacked back or unleash a war-like declaration in the scientific characterization of the behavior of HIV in the infected body to the writings of AIDS activists and theorists. Warfare analogy and linguistic and cultural values are drawn upon to describe the machination of the virus to those of community and nation. In their quest for order and control, they construct distinction between normal and perverse, legal and criminal, innocent and culpable, healthy and disabled. Labeling HIV/AIDS as a disease of certain groups becomes a way to focus, blame, isolate the sources of contraception and contagion, and to deny the vulnerability and responsibility of the wider population. The failure of biomedicine to understand the mystery and scientific breakthrough in discovering the therapy is appropriated as silent killer and created a geography of blame on the patients who didn't comply with the moral norms of the society. This continued till the development of ARVs. Prior to this, HIV was considered equivalent to AIDS, and AIDS' verdict is death. Within the terms of biomedical representation, for example, scientific knowledge and technology occupy one side of the AIDS sword and the virus occupies the other. According to medical understanding, the predominant mode of transmission of infection takes place through sexual contact or unprotected sex, followed by blood product infusion, intravenous drug use, and prenatal transmission. Although these routes seems to be medical but are rooted in the socio-cultural milieu. As Paul Farmer phrased, HIV/AIDS have as much to do with social inequality as they do with microorganisms. In India, socio-economically advantaged groups such as poor, migrants, lower caste or laboring population, sexually marginalized community like hijras, sex workers, etc. are mostly affected by it. Mobile populations like migrant laborers also become the route for infection to spread to other geographic locations as well as back to their spouses. Poverty and unemployment also drive people into transactional sex, again involving multiple partners, and sometimes reduce negotiation power for safe sex practices. In fact, in order to control the epidemic and to move these groups away from high-risk behaviors, protection of these marginalized groups in terms of their human rights to that of health security, dignity and freedom of choice, equality with other citizens is necessary. HIV/AIDS as a disease provide the scope to discuss, respond to and question hitherto neglected norms and marginalization ranging from homosexuality to promiscuity, intravenous drug use, sexual autonomy of women and so on. According to the new public health perspective, it is the illegality and stigma attached to the profession that deters the very HIV prevention program. For instance, people who choose to have sex in return for money are not only subject to more brutal legal and police treatment than who sell other commodities, but their lack of access to healthcare services also make them much more vulnerable to HIV infection and early death. In addition, the spread of HIV/AIDS too has increased discrimination against these groups in terms of rapprochement of conduits of the virus. There are differences of opinion among scholars and public health activists whether HIV/AIDS should be given priority or tropical diseases. Intellectuals who argued that HIV/AIDS is the biggest health challenge maintained that though epidemiological data for India are far less than South Africa, the estimate for India is based primarily on anonymous testing data from public clinics for prenatal care and for patients in high-risk group or with sexually transmitted infection. The second point is that they represent AIDS as universal, crossing national or regional borders and symbolic demarcation of risk group and transforming and polluting images of the human body. It is argued that although initially it was identified among female sex workers, however, over the years, the HIV/AIDS epidemic has moved from urban to rural India and from high risk to general population, largely affecting youth. However, one important point in this regard is the prevailing cultural norms of universal marriage, early age at marriage, early onset of coital activity and childbearing, as well as prevailing demographic structure imply that an overwhelming high proportion of the population comes within the sexually active group. It is estimated that about 5.7 million people live with HIV infection in India and 1 of every 8 people with HIV infection. The priority to HIV/AIDS is attributed to the fear that India could go to sub-Saharan way because it shares some of the risk factors as Africa does. Secondly, much before the government took cognizance of HIV/AIDS, international agencies put pressure on Indian government to take action against HIV/AIDS. Thirdly, there was inside pressure in India to move for a coherent and integrationist direction. As mentioned earlier, HIV/AIDS is not isolated from other common diseases. Keeping this and other dimensions in mind, no sweeping generalization or vertical solutions are likely to be able to address this problem in its entirety. The problematic aspect of AIDS control program was its targeted approach. In the epidemic of HIV/AIDS, sex workers along with other marginalized groups have become the new target of intervention. In this target approach, responsibility to contain HIV risk shifts from state and through structural transformation to individual responsibility, that is behavior change. The notion of actor responsibility raises question given the scenario of limited opportunities. These marginalized people have to avoid the risk. There is a need to identify and address the contextual and social factors that influence behavior among the risk groups. Curative component of the AIDS program is much complicated in India, given the condition of large number of people infected by HIV and absence of a medical therapy which can completely cure AIDS. Measures have also been initiated to provide antiretroviral therapy, that is ART, to people suffering from HIV in a phased manner as a result of the long battle by civil society groups and PLWHAS. Turning to empowerment aspect within prevention program, a humanistic approach was undertaken. Empowerment angle was included in NSCP 2 and 3 as a direction of Avahan, that is HIV/AIDS initiative of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in a new nomenclature called community-led structural intervention among intravenous drug users, female sex workers and male sex workers, and MSM, that is men who have sex with men. This rights-based approach was also extended to PLWHS, creating and preserving an environment in which the rights of people living with HIV/AIDS are respected and protected will allow voluntary testing and diagnosis instead of driving the epidemic underground as the traditional public health approach led to isolation and contact tracing. The other positive results are related to the welfare schemes by government, such as announcement of Kerala State AIDS Control Society to reserve a vacancy in its office for HIV positive candidates, with the hope that the presence of such a person will improve coordination with groups at risk and ensure effective prevention. Provision of pension and house allotment scheme in Andhra Pradesh, promised by central government to provide them with job cards and employment under the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that is NREGA, and ART receiving patients will benefit from the BPL category. In AIDS, the invisibility of the virus acquired enemy-like metaphor, and therefore a war-like declaration is made to attack back in the scientific characterization of the behavior of the HIV in the infected body to the writings of AIDS activists and theorists. There are similar notions among both the lay and scientific community that AIDS is a foreign containment and it spreads outside the in-group. Containment of HIV/AIDS not just means questioning the development processes or political economy, it also entails challenging other structural inequality in the realm of gender and sexuality. This means making changes in conventions of masculinity and femininity. It also impinges destigmatizing and decriminalizing the homosexuality. So, these power relations have to be addressed in the AIDS intervention rather than sex education or behavior change.
The introduction of new reproductive technologies has opened up the possibility of splitting the whole reproductive process into various parts, and introduction of such reproductive technologies has given rise to this modern concept of surrogacy. And in this process, more than one women are involved in the reproductive process, ranging from egg donor to carrying mother to intending mother. In the context of liberalization, the reproductive industry has started flourishing in many of the developing nations such as India, and these places has become lucrative destinations for reproductive tourism and more particularly commercial surrogacy. And it has been argued by various scholars that this phenomena has created an international division of labor through which women from third world countries, black women from poor economic background are more prone to exploitation through such commercial surrogacy. The issue of objectification of children, rights of children are also matters of serious concern in case of surrogacy. And it has also been pointed out by various scholars on surrogacy that there is a need for stringent law in case of dealing with the ethical issues on surrogacy.